Well, hello. Welcome to the Lost Begotten black screen so far. I am the hashtag Baby Jesus. My name is Sean Morris. No, I do not think I am Jesus. That is what you call a screening test for simpletons. I am, however, the reincarnated John the Baptist, if you'd like to give reference to me in that particular time frame. And my wife, turns out, is someone recorded in speculative history as being Mary Magdalene. But that is all completely irrelevant from the value of this channel, and is in no way considered to be the main purpose of these videos. What I provide here is the most accurate, advanced understanding of current world events, period. Possible. Outright. Nobody even comes close. And if they only could, I could just stop doing this and move on with my life. That would be great. So just know that about this channel. There is an unwilling, very reluctant, just highly whiny host with a hell of a lot of experience from thousands and thousands of years of past lives. And, I think I have a pretty good brain. I'm a stable genius. I can't say that without the African dictator accent. Maybe I should try doing the Trump impression. But anyways, the thing is, it doesn't take an extremely intelligent person to realize that I've proven that I'm basically the smartest fucker here. The thing about that is, it's not an arrogant outburst if you don't want to be the smartest fucker here. And I don't. I really don't. I just want to fucking have a fish store and grow mangrove trees to restore the coastline of my state because it's melting. But, alas, even though until recently, I really didn't think my teachers and shit were all that right about how smart I was. I just thought I was, gifted in certain areas, not in others. Just no different, no better. But then I see this world just completely sink into total moronhood. And I literally cannot find a person on the news, in government, anybody with a fucking clue. And I wonder, do they just not see the shit? Do they not see the obvious solutions to their problems? Or are they just not allowed to tell us or something? Like, it almost doesn't make sense how fucking stupid people are. I guess people just don't pay attention. I guess people just have better shit to do. I don't really think I'm that much smarter than anybody else. But I have felt extremely old since I was a little boy. And with that wisdom comes the patience to observe. And I think that's the only advantage I really have. I observe. I observe everything. And tonight, I'm going to observe in real time as we watch The Rachel Maddow Show. Now we're just going to be listening to it.
To make that decision without all the information.
Julia Ainsley, Jacob Soboroff, thanks for your great reporting. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel
Let me know if the audio is all loud and obnoxious like it has been.
Thank you very much. And thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. You should know that we've got a really big guest here tonight for the interview. Even if you don't like me, you might be interested in hearing from the person who we're going to be hosting tonight for the interview. I'm just saying, just stress out, bear with it for me.
I wonder who it is.
Trust me. Before today, I will admit that the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, had already delivered what I considered to be a Hall of Fame soundbite for this era in America. He was already at the top of the list before today. And it wasn't exactly for something he said. It was for the gargantuan 9-second-long pregnant pause that he made us all wait through, having no idea what was coming next before he finally gave his answer.
Have you talked about this issue with Admiral Rogers? That is something that I would like to withhold that question at this particular point in time.
One of the greatest Trump-era sound bites thus far. Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates last year being asked in the Senate about President Trump putting pressure on him and pressure on the head of the National Security Agency about the Russia investigation. So that was Senator Richard of Connecticut asking the DNI, Dan Coates, in an open hearing. So,
for fuck's sake.
When you both got pressure from the president on the Russia issue, did you guys ever talk to each other about that? Have you ever talked about this issue with Admiral Rogers? At which point, the pause at the end of that question becomes pregnant, waits 9 months, and then gives birth to, oh my God, I can't talk about that here. Before today. Now, National Intelligence Director Dan Coates, same guy, has another Hall of Fame nominee for the best sound bites of our insane era in American politics. It came in the context of a fairly edgy conversation that he had with our own Andrea Mitchell at a security conference today. I'm going to play a little bit of their back and forth. First part you're going to hear here is them talking about the nerve agent assassination and attempted assassinations that were carried out in Britain, that Britain believes were carried out by Russian military intelligence.
Today, the Brits are reporting that CCTV cameras picked up possible suspects in that case. What is the risk that such action could be taken, such targeted killings could be taken against defectors or other assets here in the U.S.?
It's a risk. I mean, the Russians do bold things and extraordinary things. It should have told the world that if you think the Russians are trying to be good neighbors, this is the kind of things they still do. And by the way, the former director of their KGB is the one leading their nation.
So again, we should be very wary around the former KGB leader who's leading their nation.
A lot of things point to it.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, with only translators. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. If you'd asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way. But that's not my role. That's not my job. So it is what it is.
Is there a risk that Vladimir Putin could have recorded it?
That risk is always there.
They're having that kind of a conversation. They're having this back and forth, talking about some tough things, right? And then there's this moment in this live event today where Andrea Mitchell has to interrupt her own interview with the National Intelligence Director to present some actual breaking news that is of relevance to her conversation with him in that moment.
I do want to say we have some breaking news. The White House has announced on Twitter that Vladimir Putin is coming to the White House in the fall.
Say that again?
Vladimir Putin coming to the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be special.
The White House announcement that Andrea referenced earlier said Putin was invited to Washington this fall. Were you aware of that? Just want to clarify.
I think based on my reaction, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay.
How's it going, Sean?
Given that, what do you think the agenda should be for that meeting?
Oh goodness! First of all, they're not going to ask me what the agenda is.
Would you recommend that there not be a one-on-one without note takers?
If I were asked that question, I would.
You were just asked that question.
A different way of doing it.
And that is how they learned, and that is how the Director of National Intelligence learned. Surprise! Russian President Vladimir Putin is coming to Washington soon. And that's how we learned that the DNI does not believe that the next conversation between Trump and Putin should take place without a note taker in the room, which is what happened between Trump and Putin, of course, at the start of this week. Today in Congress,
how about an interrogator?
Committee in the House, there was an effort by the Democrats on that committee to actually subpoena testimony from the woman you see spot shadowed here. She was the translator, the only other American in the room during that Trump-Putin meeting this week. Of course, she was busy translating. She had a job to do. It's a hard job. She was translating. She wasn't keeping an official record of what was going on in that conversation. So you can see why it might be practically problematic to call on her to be America's official record of what happened at that summit. But it's an open question as to whether that's more problematic than us and everybody, including the National Intelligence Director, not having any idea what actually happened in that room and what the president promised on behalf of all of us. So far, we have no record of that, and it's not an esoteric concern. For a second straight day today, the Russian military continued to insist that there's some big new military plan about Syria that was agreed to verbally between Putin and Trump at that summit. And we have no idea what that might be. Russia insists that it happened. The White House has so far given no indication of what that might be. The top U.S. military leadership at CENTCOM today explained on the record that CENTCOM also has no idea what that might be. So, if the U.S. military is supposed to be doing something different now around Syria, or if military conditions in Syria are about to change materially when we've got lots of Americans over there in the middle of it, so far the U.S. military doesn't know what it is Trump might have signed them up for in terms of any such changes. Russia says there's plenty coming. Republicans on the Intelligence Committee rejected Democrats' efforts today to get testimony from the translator. So we will continue to have no record of all of what happened in that meeting. That said, as Dan Coates admitted, maybe there's a tape. Maybe the Russians taped Trump in that meeting, which of course the Russians can now use for their own purposes, however they want. They could even presumably doctor such a tape if they wanted to make it appear that Trump said something in that meeting that he didn't actually say, but they wanted to make it look like he said that. Why not? There's no other American who can corroborate what actually happened. Why wouldn't the Russians make up something absolutely to their advantage and say that's what Trump agreed to? And maybe even put out the tape that proves it. We're at their mercy. So we'll find out when we find out. Anything could happen. As proof of that, you should also know, from a different angle, that this happened today in Washington. This is the sort of thing we tend to think of as impossible now. Your eyes do not deceive you. That is a 98-0 vote today in the Senate. That's the Senate voting unanimously today that the president maybe shouldn't send former American diplomats and other U.S. officials and U.S. citizens over to Russia to be interrogated by the Russian government just because Vladimir Putin told Trump that's what he wanted. I mean, it is still almost impossible to believe that the White House really did spend a few days thinking over that request from Vladimir Putin at the summit earlier this week. I mean, the White House acknowledged that, yeah, that's what Putin asked. Yes, there was some conversation about that. The White House acknowledged the president was meeting with his team and talking over that request from Russia. I mean, incredibly, they do appear to have mulled over the possibility of doing this, handing Americans over to the Russians. They mulled it over for several days. But after a robust outcry and this 98-0 vote in the Senate, the president apparently finally thought better of it. The White House this afternoon put out a short, very complimentary statement about Vladimir Putin's sincerity in making this request to get his fangs into former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul and other U.S. officials who he wanted Trump to hand over on a platter. But despite the sincerity of Putin's request to have those Americans handed over, the White House announced that they have finally concluded, at least this time, that we won't be sending on anybody to them. I do want to just point out one thing, though, about that demand from the Russian government. Obviously, and for a lot of good reason, the focus has mostly been on former U.S. Ambassador Michael McFaul, whom Vladimir Putin has seen as an enemy for years. For all the same reasons that Putin hated Hillary Clinton with a passion, he hated Michael McFaul right alongside her twice on Sundays. But Putin, in the Maria Butina case. Maria Butina is the only Russian who's been indicted in a starring, if somewhat romantically tragic role in the Maria Butina case. Maria Butina is the only Russian who's been indicted in the Russia scandal thus far, who's actually been arrested and is being held in U.S. custody. We expect to see her back in court in a few days. But since her indictment, the Washington Post has added some further reporting about U.S. Person 1, who was essentially described as a co-conspirator with her in that indictment. She's charged in that indictment with operating essentially as a secret agent of the Russian Federation in this country. Now, U.S. Person 1 has been identified in multiple news reports, but not by law enforcement. Multiple news reports say he is Paul Erickson, who's a conservative political activist with a long history in Republican politics. It was described in court yesterday by Maria Butina's defense lawyer as Maria Butina's boyfriend. That said, prosecutors have alleged in their court filings that it might not actually be true love. That they have documentation that indicates that, at least from Butina's perspective, their personal relationship, their living together, was not a sincere love affair. It was something she was doing somewhat resentfully as part of her covert influence operation for the Russian government. Well, according to the Washington Post's reporting on Erickson, on U.S. Person 1, check this out. Erickson lobbied for a role in Trump's transition team and complained after the election when he ran into a problem with his security clearance. Since we now know he was sleeping with a Russian spy, I'm kind of happy about the security clearance process in that case, just as an aside. Anyway, quote, even without official credentials, though, Erickson pressed Trump down. This guy, who was very personally involved in her and potentially in on her scheme, he recommended that the new Deputy National Security Advisor should be K.T. McFarland. That was an unusual choice. K.T. McFarland had been involved in Republican politics. She had worked in earlier Republican White Houses, but when I say earlier, way earlier. And since then, she's been an occasional contributor to Fox News, but she's been barely on the periphery of even weird Trumpian national security politics. Not a high-profile figure. Not a heavyweight 8-0 vote today in the Senate. That's the Senate voting unanimously today that the president maybe shouldn't send former American diplomats and other U.S. officials. Garland was elevated to a very high-level job in the Trump White House. Deputy National Security Advisor essentially runs the national security process inside the White House. It's the operations officer who runs the whole National Security Council and runs intelligence through the national security process. The National Security Council is hundreds of people. Being deputy national security advisor is the kind of job where you work 30 hours a day.
Oh, is that all?
K.T. McFarland always seemed like an odd fit for that job, but nevertheless, they gave her that job. We now know, in part, on the recommendation of Maria Butina's boyfriend. She did not last long in that job, though. K.T. McFarland left in the backwash after National Security Advisor Mike Flynn was fired a month into the new administration, and then he was later criminally charged in conjunction with the Mueller investigation related to his contacts with the Russian government. Okay, so this pries open a whole new thing. You remember how the Flynn disaster unfolded, right? Just a few days after the Trump inauguration, not even a week into the new administration, Flynn was interviewed by the FBI at the White House about contacts he'd had with the Russian government. 2 days after that FBI interview, the acting Attorney General of the United States, Sally Yates, called the White House counsel's office and expressed with some urgency that there was a matter of serious national security concern that she needed to discuss in person with the White House counsel. She went in person to the White House, she met with the White House counsel in a secure office space, and she delivered to the White House counsel the Justice Department's serious concerns about Mike Flynn related to his contacts with the Russian government, and most urgently, the Justice Department's belief that he, while serving in that incredibly sensitive job with access to the highest classified information in the U.S. government, the Justice Department believed he was actually, at that moment, compromised by the Russian government. The Russian government had leverage over him that they could potentially use to compel him to do, take your pick, hand over secrets, take action against the national security interest of the United States. I mean, whatever the Russians might want him to do. They had leverage on him. He was compromised. Sally Yates. And even to this day, we still do not have very much clarity about why they then kept him on as National Security Advisor for another 18 days. I mean, it's been 18 months since then. We still don't know why they did. And Sally Yates later explained, both in testimony to the Senate and in public interviews, that she was somewhat flummoxed by that White House decision to keep him on.
We were very concerned about the underlying conduct and went through and explained the compromise situation with the Russians and told him specifically that we were giving him this information so that they could act. We felt like
it was a national security threat.
Absolutely.
You have no doubt about that.
I don't think anybody in the intel community has a doubt about that.
You wanted the White House to act.
Absolutely, yes.
To do something.
We expected the White House to act.
Did you expect them to act quickly?
Yes.
There was urgency to the information.
Yes.
Do you think Michael Flynn should have been fired?
Whether he's fired or not is a decision for the President of the United States to make. But it doesn't seem like that's a person who should be sitting in the National Security Advisor position.
If you hadn't been fired, if you were still in your position, and you hadn't seen any action over the course of that 18 days, was there more your role as the acting Attorney General would have permitted you to do?
Oh, I would have gone back to the White House.
If you were still the acting Attorney General, you would have gone back to the White House.
I would have been knocking on the door again, yes.
Why?
Because I would have been concerned that we had a National Security Advisor who was compromised. I wouldn't have been able to control what happened, but I would have gone back to him.
What sort of questions would you have asked?
What have you done?
It's been a mystery all along. Clearly a somewhat frustrating mystery to Sally Yates herself all along. Why the White House didn't act for more than 2 weeks after this very urgent national security threat was brought to their attention. But now, 18 months later, right, another part of this is unfolding. In December, we learned that despite assurances from the White House that Mike Flynn had acted alone, that his contacts with the Russian government had been the act of sort of a rogue official, nobody else knew what he was doing. We learned in December that, in fact, he hadn't acted alone. His deputy, K.T. McFarland, had known about Flynn's secret contacts with the Russian government before, during, and after those contacts happened. She helped set him up. These are the same contacts with the Russian government that he pled guilty to lying to the FBI about. K.T. McFarland would also later lie about her knowledge of Flynn's contact with the Russian government when she was questioned about it by the U.S. Senate. One of the weird long tales of this story is that after she got ousted as Deputy National Security Advisor, following the Flynn debacle, the Trump administration actually for a while tried to name her an ambassador. As part of the confirmation process for her would-be ambassadorship, she appears to have lied to the U.S. Senate and denied any knowledge of Flynn's contact with the Russian government. Her emails from the transition show, in fact, she knew about those contacts. She was in on it. Flynn was not acting alone. Flynn was not even alone in lying about those contacts with the Russian government. KT McFarland did it too. And now, based on this new reporting from the Washington Post, we know that U.S. Person 1, reportedly Paul Erickson, Maria Butina's fake boyfriend, who prosecutors say she was romantically involved with as part of her covert operation to serve as an agent of the Russian government in this country. Maria Butina's just for the sake of spying boyfriend. According to the Washington Post, he's the one who recommended KT McFarland for that job in the first place, which is a job you really might have not ever expected her to get. Sally Yates was acting Attorney General when she tried to warn the White House with urgency about a senior official in the Trump White House being compromised by the Russian government. She was driven by the urgency of needing to get that official out of there because of the danger that represented to our country. The White House, we know at the time, didn't see it that same way. How does it change that story? How does it affect our understanding of that lack of urgency on the part of the Trump White House to now know that Flynn wasn't alone? That Flynn's deception around this issue was not on something in which he was acting alone. And at least obliquely, there appears to be a connection to an illegal Russian influence operation, which the Justice Department apparently just broke up with this new indictment. Sally Yates is the first person from whom we Americans got the news about people at the highest level in this Trump administration being compromised by the Russian government while they served as U.S. officials. Today, that warning has a whole new resonance. Sally Yates joins us for the interview. Next. There is Sally Yates. She is the former acting Attorney General of the United States, former Deputy Attorney General of the United States. She's a career prosecutor and Justice Department official with nearly 30 years service at Justice before she was fired by the President in January 2017. Ms. Yates, I have really been looking forward to talking to you. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I know you do not do a ton of interviews, so I realize it's sort of an act of trust to be here at all, and I appreciate that from you.
Well, thanks.
Let me start by talking a little bit about Mike Flynn. He's awaiting sentencing now. He has pled guilty to lying to the FBI. You have testified to the Senate, and you have done several public interviews in which you've talked about the circumstances in which you brought that warning to the White House right at the very start of the Trump administration. Is there anything that you can tell us now, or even just remind us of now, about the urgency with which you warned the White House about him? For me, I'm asking because of this persistent mystery about why the White House waited so long, waited 18 days before they took any action in response to your warning. Is there anything that you can tell us that might shed light on why that happened?
No, I certainly can't figure it out myself as to why they took all of that time. You know, I came knocking on the door, telling them that they had a serious problem with their national security advisor, that their national security advisor could be compromised with the Russians, and came back the next day to give them even more information about that. And it made it really clear to them that we were telling them this so that they could act. This was not a casual heads up, not an FYI, that we're giving you this information so that you can act. And then nothing happened.
When you say compromised by the Russians, I have read enough spy novels and watched enough bad television about these sort of things to imagine a real sort of like underworld mafia connotation to that. Like, we've got something on you, we will expose that thing or effectuate that thing in some way that you're so averse to that we can make you do things you'd otherwise never do. That's like the raw movie style version of compromise as I imagine it. How does it work in the real world? What are the potentially...
I think they compromised his son first.
The kind of compromise you were worried about with Flynn.
Well, you know, the Russians are pretty crafty with this. They can do the overt type of threats like you just described there, but they can also do the more subtle forms where they just can let you know that they have evidence that would be embarrassing and troubling to you. And here, where this had become a big public thing about whether or not General Flynn had been talking with the Russians about sanctions, it had become such a big public thing, and there were denials out there by various members of the White House, all the way up to the Vice President, saying that this had not happened. Then when the Russians had what we expected were recordings that would prove that it did, that's the kind of thing you can hang over someone's head. And no administration should want their national security advisor.
intelligence that they shouldn't have to hand over the names of spies that we
Really?
in Moscow that are working for U.S. intelligence that they could then go. Right. The reason this has resonance now is because of the ongoing nature of the Michael Flynn case. As I said, he's awaiting sentencing, and I have another couple of things I'd like to ask you about that. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the political environment we're in this week, in which I think a lot of people in the country have been shaken by the president's interactions with President Putin in Helsinki, and people are now quite openly discussing the prospect and what it might mean for us as a country and what the imperative is for us as a country if President Trump is compromised by the Russian government. I mean, I've been trying to do this thought experiment about what that might mean for a national security advisor, and I think you opened our eyes to that prospect. If the president were compromised, and that's an open concern right now, how much worse is the risk?
Well, to state the obvious, it's exponentially worse. I mean, you don't want any of your high-level officials compromised with the Russians, but certainly not the president. And I think all of us were really shaken by the events that took place in Helsinki. And, you know, it wasn't really just a rhetorical, semantic faux pas that we were talking about here. It was what his words reflected, that they revealed what our president is thinking and how he feels and where his loyalties lie. And so I think the startling reality for all of us is that we are faced with a situation where our president, the person whom we have entrusted to lead this country, isn't all in for our nation.
Do you believe that we will ever know?
He's a what do you call it? A globalist.
The president is not just Russophilic. He's not just in love, but he's compromised. Do you believe that will ever come out, that truth will ever be known?
You know, I don't know what the status of the investigation is that Special Counsel Mueller is conducting right now, so it's hard to know.
As a citizen, as an observer of these processes, not asking you for anything that you might have come any special information.
This is, you know, core American stuff, and all of us should want to get to the bottom of that.
Wanting and expecting are two different things, and I understand how you just maneuvered around that. Sally Yates, lawyer. Very good one, too. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Sally Yates, who's former acting Attorney General of the United States.
Laney.
Former acting Attorney General of the United States. Thank you again for being here. Last month, we got to see a letter that was sent to the special counsel's office from the president's lawyers and ended up getting published in the New York Times. And that letter included references to memos that the White House counsel Don McGahn had written about his interactions with you about Mike Flynn. And in those memos, at least according to the president's lawyers, he says that when you came to the White House to warn about the possible compromise of Flynn as national security advisor, you never indicated to him that Flynn was actually under investigation. The lawyer letter cites the quote, White House understanding that there was no FBI investigation of Flynn. And that seems like maybe a fine point. The reason it ends up being important, and the reason the president's lawyers are writing about it to the special counsel's office, is because I think there's an idea that it may look more like obstruction of justice on the part of the president if when he went to the FBI director and said lay off Flynn, he knew there was an open FBI investigation into Michael Flynn. So the White House counsel saying you never indicated that Flynn was the subject of an investigation. Can you shed any light on that?
Well, yeah, when I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, I talked about the two different meetings that I had with Mr. McGahn. And in the first meeting, Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not the investigation was criminal or whether or not it was a counterintelligence investigation.
So he referenced...
And I declined to answer that.
Okay.
And then I also testified that in the follow-up meeting the next day, he wanted to know whether if they took any action, whether that would negatively impact the investigation. Because they...
Obviously there was an investigation because the Attorney General is bringing you the information that was attained because of an investigation. When the Attorney General's office gathers information on a person relating to events and activities, that's called an investigation. Oh my God.
Didn't want to negatively impact anything that was going on in the investigation. So he and I talked back and forth in both meetings about impact on an investigation.
And if the president, in that context, having been advised, presumably by his White House counsel, that there was an investigation concerning the National Security Advisor, if the president then went to the director of the FBI and said, ease up on Mike Flynn, who he knows is the subject of an investigation, how much ambiguity is there? How much legal wiggle room is there as to whether or not that was an effort to obstruct that investigation?
You know, I'm not going to get into sort of a legal definition of obstruction there, because I think that's really up to Bob Mueller and his folks to make that determination. But certainly, from what we know about that, it sounds like that there was an effort to influence the investigation.
I mentioned at the top of the show that there's been some new reporting related to a new indictment that's been handed down, actually not by the Special Counsel's Office, but within the National Security Division of the Justice Department, about this alleged secret Russian agent, Maria Butina, and her involvement with a U.S. person who's been identified sort of circumstantially in press reports. What's been reported by the Washington Post is that that person who was involved with this alleged Russian agent recommended the Deputy National Security Advisor for her post, K.T. McFarland. Since the Flynn investigation, since the Flynn affair and your role in it, we have learned that Mr. Flynn doesn't appear to have been acting alone when he contacted the Russian government. And in fact, when he made those contacts that he later pled guilty to lying to the FBI about, Ms. McFarland appears to have been involved not only in knowing about them, but in setting those up. She also appears to have not been truthful with the Senate when she was asked about those. If Flynn wasn't acting alone, does that change anything materially? Does that make the case about Flynn resonate in any more or less worrying way if there was somebody else who was involved with him and he wasn't on his own?
Well, I don't know if it's more or less worrying. I mean, certainly if there are other people who are involved in this,
For Acting Attorney General of the United States, thank you again for being here. Last month, we got to see a letter that was sent to the Special Counsel's Office from the President's lawyers. It ended up getting published in the New York Times. And that letter included references to you, references to memos that the White House counsel, Don McGahn, had written about his interactions with you about Mike Flynn. And in those memos, at least according to the President's lawyers, he says that when you came to the White House to warn about the possible compromise of Flynn as National Security Advisor, you never indicated to him that Flynn was actually under investigation. The lawyer letter cites the quote, White House understanding that there was no FBI investigation of Flynn. And that seems like maybe a fine point. The reason it ends up being important, and the reason the President's lawyers are writing about it to the Special Counsel's Office, is because I think there's an idea that before Acting Attorney General of the United States, and before she was Acting Attorney General of the United States, she was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, which all of us in America now have a much greater appreciation of the importance of as a position.
Well, this is a bit disjointed.
Do you feel that Rod Rosenstein, who is Deputy Attorney General because of Jeff Sessions being recused from the Russia matter he's overseeing, the Mueller...
Do you feel like you're overdosing on Quaaludes while watching this interview?
Investigation and other things in the Russia matter. Do you feel like he is insulated enough in his...
Do you know what a Quaalude is? I'm not really sure.
His position in terms of undue influence from the administration. If you were still in his shoes, if that was still your job, what kind of protections would you want people pushing for you?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's worried me, is that so many people are focused on ensuring that Bob Mueller isn't fired. Mm-hmm. We need to be equally focused in making sure that Rod Rosenstein isn't fired either. And that's because he really has an ability to be able to control the special counsel's investigation in terms of significant steps that are taken. He has to approve those in terms of information that might go to Congress, in terms of information that can be publicly released. So if you want a backdoor way to try to choke the life out of the special counsel's investigation, you would replace Rod Rosenstein with someone whom you can control. Mm-hmm. And, I think that he's done a very good job so far of ensuring that this investigation is going where it needs to go, that they're going to follow the facts and the evidence, and that Bob Mueller has the running room that he needs to be able to get to the bottom of these really important questions.
Well, you say people need to focus on making sure that he isn't fired. I mean, thinking hard about it won't help. I mean, what can be done to protect him?
Well, folks in Congress seem to be making movement and trying to do this work as well.
They've certainly tried to make a public enemy out of it.
Absolutely, and even some talking about impeachment articles. On what basis? I have absolutely no idea. You would be impeaching him, but I think that the White House and members of Congress respond to public pressure and respond to a focus, and I think that most people have come to realize now that it's absolutely essential that Mueller stay in his place. But there needs to be that same public focus on Rod Rosenstein as well.
Were you ever pressured in the way that he has been by Republicans in Congress? Were you ever pressured by anybody to hand over law enforcement sensitive documents in the middle of an ongoing investigation? That's been a hallmark of the sort of efforts to demonize him with Congress.
No, I mean, that has long been a firm tradition of the Department of Justice, that you don't turn over materials about ongoing investigations to Congress.
But I understand that the Justice Department always felt that was a long-standing norm. Did members of Congress ever violate it? I mean, were members of Congress pushing for this kind of stuff before, or is this new and specific to this investigation?
Well, I can't say they never asked.
Yeah.
But they didn't make a big fuss about it when we said no.
Wow. Can I ask you about Paul Manafort for a moment? Paul Manafort is due to go on trial next week. The FBI, as far as we understand it, began investigating him years ago, 2014. You became Deputy Attorney General in 2015. Was the Justice Department cognizant of, focused on the fact that there was an ongoing investigation of Paul Manafort at the time when he was chosen to be a major party candidate's presidential campaign chairman? Does that put the Justice Department in an awkward position? What's the right way to respond given that?
I really can't answer. I'm going to frustrate you with my answer here because I can't talk about what I knew when I was there that hasn't become public.
You may not be able to answer this either, but his defense team has repeatedly raised the claim that because a lot of the investigation of Manafort is about matters that long precede the campaign, that indicates that the prosecution is somehow improper, because if those things were so egregious when they happened, if the Justice Department was investigating for years, why didn't they bring charges against him then? They only brought charges against him after he'd been a Trump campaign chairman. That suggests that they're only going after him because of his association with the Trump campaign. How should we understand the validity or the gravity of that charge?
Well, there are lots of different reasons why prosecutors bring charges when they do. Mr. Manafort has filed a whole lot of motions, and so far I don't think he's prevailed on any of them.
Shooting the moon so far.
This is the kind of issue that he would be raising pre-trial. So if he had a good argument on this, I would expect he's made it and that the court has rejected it.
Sally Yates is the former acting Attorney General of the United States, 27 years at the Justice Department before relieved of her job there by President Trump, not 2 weeks into the Trump administration. I imagine that I'm not going to get to talk to you all that often in the future, but anytime you want to come back and talk about things going on in the law and in policy and in matters of the day, I hope you'll let us know. I'd love to talk to you more than you'd want to.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. All right. We will be right back. Stay with us.
She ought to be reinstated.
Last night, across the street from the White House, an 18-person mariachi band and more than 1,000
Hell yeah.
making lots of noise, joyful noise, to protest and to try, I think, to irk the guy who lives across the street in the White House.
There you go.
That was in Lafayette Park. This was last night in New York City. Hundreds of people in Times Square chanting, "You're fired! You're fired!" This is kind of what it's been like since President Trump's subordination display with the Russian president in Finland earlier this week. Starting that night, there's been protests across the street from the White House every night. They wanted to do two things. I think they wanted to disrupt the jet-lagged president's sleep patterns. They also wanted to give people a place to express their opinions about that meeting with Putin. Just that first night, more than 500 people were there in front of the White House gates. Second night, there were about 1,000 people. The musical performance part just started last night with the mariachi band and more like well over 1,000 people. Tonight, they apparently tried opera singers belting out the high notes. Good evening, Mr. President. We hear they're thinking about bagpipers for the next one. Stay tuned.
I'm not sure what the hell just happened. There was like mariachi and then the fat lady sang. Or... That mean it's over? So, news today 24/7, gaming bingo. All these interesting little side upload channels.
Thank you, Director. It's great to have you here. There is a lot at stake. No one knows this more than you, so let's get right to it. I want to start with Russia. We'll move on to a lot of the other threats and things that you're looking about the world. But let's start with Russia. You did something really extraordinary on Monday. Moments after the president appeared to be siding with Vladimir Putin over you personally, by name, you stood up and spoke out. I'm wondering, why did you do that?
I'm not surprised we're starting with Russia. I was just doing my job.
Indeed.
As I expressed to the President on my third visit to the Oval Office as his new principal advisor, I said, Mr. President, there will be times when I will have to bring news to you that you don't want to hear. I just want you to know that the news I bring to you, the information I bring to you, will be, to the best extent that we can, be unvarnished, non-politicized, the best that our incredible intelligence agency can produce, so that you will have the information you need to make the policy decisions that you're going to be faced with. And on that basis, we started a good relationship. I just felt at this point in time that what we had assessed and reassessed, carefully gone over, still stands, and that it was important to take that stand on behalf of the intelligence community and on behalf of the American people. As we have seen, the President has made statements relative to in support of that, which I appreciate. The latest being on I think, one of your rival networks. Give you the privilege of not naming them. Keep NBC in front here. So therefore, it was a part of my role. And I felt that it was important that I do that. It has been said, it has been discussed personally with the President, and I think it's time to move on.
Well, except that the President has made so many conflicting statements. He has switched from one position to the other even in the same day, as recently as yesterday. And I'm wondering, when you watched that in Helsinki, what was your gut reaction watching him validate Vladimir Putin's assessment over yours?
Well, my thoughts there were that I believed I needed to correct the record for that, and that this is the job I signed up for, and that was my responsibility. Obviously, I wished he had made a different statement, but I think that now that has been clarified based on his late reactions to this, and so I don't think I want to go any further than that.
Well, in the cabinet room, one of the statements that you referred to, his clarifications, he said, I accept our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election took place. Could be other people also. Could be other people also?
Right.
What does he know that you don't know?
Well, could is not a definitive word here. That could someone else be looking at how to do this relative to our elections, possibly rogue states, whatever. We know others have potential capability, but it's undeniable that the Russians are taking the lead on this. Basically, they are the ones that are trying to undermine our basic values, divide us with our allies. They are the ones that are trying to wreak havoc over our election process. We need to call them out on that. It's critical that we do so, and to then take steps to make sure that they are not able to do this with the election coming up. Learn the lessons from the past, put in place the things that we need to put in place in terms of making sure that we can guarantee to the American public when they walk in that voting booth and cast their vote, however they cast it, it is a valid vote. It will not be tampered with. And whatever result comes from these elections is something the American people can have confidence in, that it was not manipulated by anyone, whether that was externally or internally. We know politically there have been times when parties have tried to manipulate the votes one way or another. That just simply is not acceptable. The very pillar basics of democracy is the ability to have confidence in your elected officials that they were elected legitimately, and we have to take every effort to ensure that that happens in this upcoming election and future elections.
And just to nail this down, the 2017 intelligence assessment of the community, the findings said Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. 18 months later, has anything changed that would make it more or less certain that it was Vladimir Putin in charge of that?
Well, I don't want to get too far into what the investigation that's going on and what they may produce from that.
But in terms of the intelligence assessment?
Well, we just continue to provide intelligence that we achieve relative to our customers, which is the President, which are the policymakers in the White House, which is our oversight committees in the House and the Senate. And that basis, that is available to them. And we will keep doing that. Relative to what's coming in 2018, as Dr. Nilsson said this morning, DHS does not have evidence of the fact that anywhere near what happened in 2016. However, despite that, we absolutely cannot just rest on that assumption. As I mentioned in my speech at Hudson just a week ago or so, it's just one click of the keyboard that could change this narrative. And so we have to be ever vigilant on this, and I think we have to be relentless in terms of calling out the Russians for what they've done. We have to be vigilant in terms of putting steps in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. More transparency we can have relative to this issue.
If not for Russian interference, Paul Rubin should be able to fucking beat Trump.
Who work for you are working around the clock, around the world, and putting their lives on the line in many cases to make sure that our democracy is safe. What do you say to them when the president disavows their work, or others in our government disavows their work and criticizes their work?
I say to our people both around the world and in the 16 agencies within the United States, I say to them, we are professionals. We are here to provide professional service to our government. We need to keep our heads down. We need to go forward with the wonderful technological capabilities that we have to produce intelligence. There's a lot of political swirl going around. Just do your jobs. Our goal is to make unpoliticized information necessary for our policymakers to make good decisions. And so try to get up every morning, go to work, do your job. If you have thinking in one way or another way relative to a plus or a minus, set that aside. Go home and think about it, whatever. But the product that you are putting together has to be absent from any kind of political manipulation.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, with only translators. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the President has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the President's prerogative. He had asked me how that ought to be conducted. I would have suggested a different way, but that's not my role. That's not my job. So it is what it is.
Is there a risk that Vladimir Putin could have recorded it?
That risk is always there.
I'm so
Is
damn
there a
good
risk
at body
that the soccer
language, I
ball
can't even
could have
say
been
anything
wired?
about that. What?
That risk is always there.
Is there a risk that the soccer ball could have been wired?
Was that a World Cup soccer ball, or was that we have ability to measure those kinds of things to determine whether or not they
I
are
kind of
risk
figured
or
you
not.
did.
Every time I come home with, there's a limit to what they can give you if you meet with your foreign adversaries. All that has to go through the radar.
Bet you I could build something to get right past your shit.
$20 or whatever. Yeah, so I'm sure that soccer ball's been looked at very carefully.
I bet you looked at that big letter from Kim Jong-un that was brought right into the Oval Office. Also, that was really...
In fact, I just designed something in my head for a soccer ball that could get right
Today,
past
the White
anything you
House
could
said
possibly
that
do.
the president now disagrees with Vladimir Putin's offer to question Ambassador McFaul and other Americans, other diplomats.
Naive
as a
little
former
puppies.
ambassador,
Fucking
will you say that
schoolgirls
it
we
took
are.
the president 3 days to come to that conclusion?
Andrew, I don't know how to answer questions like that. My focus now is on what's happening around the world, threats that are faced to the American people, threats that undermine our democracies. That's what I was hired to do. I can't focus on, when I was a policymaker in the Congress, we like to think, as senators, we have an answer for everything, even though we don't. But we like to think that. Now I'm in a completely different job. I spent a lifetime trying to get my name in the paper and back at home, so people would vote for me, remember the name when they went into the voting booth. I'm in a job now where it's just the opposite. I like to spend my lifetime not being in the paper, not having my picture. Or words. I do very few of these types of...
I know. We're very grateful to you for today.
It's attractive to... It's hard to say no to an invitation to Aspen, especially in the hot summer of Washington, D.C.
Why is there a politician that's DNI?
I just, try to keep my focus where it needs to be.
Thought he was
military. So there's just some things I just don't get into.
Well, let's focus on your warnings. On Friday, you warned that... Well, you said the warning lights are blinking red again, as they were before 9/11 on terror threats. You were speaking about cyber.
I was.
You said Russia was the most aggressive of the foreign actors in cyber.
By far.
I mean,
in what way?
Really
what does it mean in terms of the attacks, the frequency of attacks, successful attacks?
It means we're under attack in many, many ways. Our financial institutions, our critical infrastructure, our industries. In many ways, the plus side of what the interconnectedness of the world through the internet, all the revolutionary things that have been incredibly impactful in terms of moving us forward. We're now learning about the dark side, and it's pretty ugly. And what we see every day against our institutions, against our military, against our financial services, against our critical infrastructure, stretching from those who have major capabilities of doing this, starting with Russia, including China, maybe for a different purpose, stealing our innovations. Their intent, I think, is different than the Russians. Add Iran into that, add ISIS into that. Here we first learned about ISIS when they started slicing off heads. And we identified ISIS as a 7th century barbarism. that is just totally unacceptable. And where did this come from? And where did this theology come from? At the same time they were slicing off heads, they were operating a sophisticated cyber program to reach out, to recruit people, to give them instructions, inspire them to take acts, to join this movement, this jihadist movement, through some very capable ways of using cyber, sophisticated ways. And so you see the danger that cyber can provide if you do it in nefarious ways. We see that, it's everything from a sophisticated nation with a lot of capabilities, to rogue states, to criminal organizations, to a kid sitting in his dorm room that can wreak havoc on our economy, wreak havoc on our country, on our critical infrastructure. We are throwing everything we have at it to prevent that from happening, but it has become, in my mind, and what I stated in the threat assessments, up there at the top. And we need to understand that. I was worried about a complacency. Every day you hear 120 million people's names have been snatched from the Equifax or this or that or whatever. Yeah, okay. And they've probably got stuff from you through your phone. You should be changing your password every week. Oh, I'm not going to do that. I can't remember a password anyway, et cetera, et cetera. There's a complacency and an acceptance of what's happening out there that, well, this is just what it is. This is just the result of it. And so I'm concerned about, you're going to say, what do you worry at night? I'm concerned about a cyber 9/11.
What would that look like?
Well, let's say you shut down Wall Street for a week. What does that do to world markets and people's investments? Let's say you crash a Bank of America or Wells Fargo or whatever, and all of a sudden people are saying, wait a minute, what happened to my account? What happened to my retirement? Oh, we'll get it back, okay. Well, we've seen this, and we've seen coverage of that. We haven't seen the big one. What about an attack on the electric grid in New England in January that maybe is sophisticated enough to take it out for 3 days? How many people will die from minus-degree weather on that? I mean, those are the things that I think you have to try to anticipate. What are the capabilities that our adversaries now have if they wanted to use them? And as Charlie Allen, who in my mind is a legend, and I look to him for advice on regular breakfasts. I won't tell you where we meet, but these are things I think strategically we have to look forward. Tom Clancy's Sum of All Fears, when a terrorist group obtains a weapon of mass destruction. The weapon of mass destruction had been one of those airliners that hit the Twin Towers.
Wild cherry Pepsi.
We'd be talking about 300,000 victims or more. And so these are the things we have to think about. We can't rest on our laurels that, yes, we collect a lot of information, we all know what's going on. There are people out there playing this game of chess with us in ways that want to take us down, and we have to be better than they. And that's a huge challenge, and which was why I say it's a whole of government effort that has to take place relative to cyber.
Yet the White House fired its cyber coordinator and has not replaced him. And is the president really engaged in this? Because if the president is not leading the charge, will the troops really try to take the hill?
Well, as you know, we have a new National Security Advisor, John Bolton. John Bolton made the decision to make a change relative to...
the president's leading the charge. There he is on his horse.
John Bolton is putting in place the replacements for that. It is a key, it's been assured me that is a key issue that we need to address. In the meantime, this is spread throughout our various agencies, each one somewhat different than the other, taking major steps. We have fusion centers, we have processes underway. Kirsten Nielsen basically told you about what DHS is doing. Defense is doing that. All of our agencies are engaged in that. This is going to continue to ramp up, and it involves not just tampering with the election, but it involves putting the right defenses in place, the right strategies in place in terms of how to retaliate if necessary.
One thing that it doesn't involve which is why your efforts are completely fucking useless, is addressing the fact that our entire population has been brainwashed in a two-prong effort to set it against itself.
It's clearly one of our top priorities.
Last week you said Russia and other actors were exploring vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure and trying to infiltrate energy, water, nuclear, and manufacturing sectors. These actions are persistent, they are pervasive, and they are meant to undermine America's democracy. Have they succeeded? And have you found penetrations in areas?
Well, sure. I mean, we see. All you have to do is pick up the paper and see who was the latest successful hack. And so there are
those from criminal
penetrations
syndicates, or those foreign actors?
From any number of. The attribution is one of the problems that we have. You're not lining up tanks and planes here and see where the enemy is. You don't know exactly where it's coming from. We have capabilities to determine that, but that takes some pretty good statecraft in order to define that. So
you have to match the telemetry analysis, if you will, with field knowledge. This is something that we haven't been good at until just recently. And we've gotten a lot better, but there's a hell of a gap. I mean, we've been fooled by I don't want to say something as simple as a proxy server, but basically we've been fooled by simple proxy servers for what was it, over a decade? Yeah, just about over a decade we were fooled by a simple proxy server. Or two, or three. So when the technical data points to a specific location, it's only really field knowledge that can determine what that specific location is actually being used for. Because the methodology of creating a proxy-based assault is not necessarily something that would be done by means that we in the West would consider convenient, for instance. I mean, it could be as simple as effective masking in a likely place, and the investigating technician has an aha moment that leads them to stop digging deeper. But it could be as simple as hard drives on the back of mules. You never know.
Yes, this is something that is broad, and we see it coming from all different sources. Criminal organizations can use it. You see the stealing of Bitcoin. You see the stealing of money. North Korea is pretty famous for its capabilities to gain revenue by hacking financial institutions. So it's everywhere.
Are you seeing any evidence of increased Iranian aggression? Perhaps in...
Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. You've been listening to the Director of National Intelligence.
Yes, I was listening to the Director of National Intelligence. As disappointing as that was. So let's check out a closer,
While this terrible new series of...
hopefully uninterrupted, other than that awkward pausing moment, uninterrupted version of the earlier Maddow thing.
While this terrible new series of... terrible new series of The Man in the High Castle plays out in our real lives now, and we await this Putin visit. Well, we are also still waiting for that attack. And
Damn it. Sorry.
with some of the legal cases around the Russian attack and the question of American cooperation and co-conspiring with that attack. And some of what we're waiting for is fairly straightforward. Obviously, the felony criminal trial of the president's campaign chair, Paul Manafort, is due to start in less than a week now. Potential jurors are expected to show up at the courthouse in the Eastern District of Virginia for the Paul Manafort.
Let's talk about this fucking winner here some more. So, what I said in, what was it, fucking August? Not even August. Like May of 2016. As soon as I found out that Manafort was Trump's campaign chair, I said that what he was going to do, what he was doing right then, at the time, when I was reporting it, you know, not a fucking year later like these people reported it, or have yet to report in full detail, because they still don't know, is that Paul Manafort was laundering money to use in a massive bribery campaign that would secure Donald Trump the Republican nomination. And I really thought at that point, and this is where I was wrong, naive, hopeful, just too optimistic, just too much belief in the rule of law, I guess. Or perhaps the sting operation continues. One of the two. And I'll consider that out loud in a second. But what I was wrong about at the time was that the Republican Party establishment had enough of a national security embedment and innate national security participation in the innate participation in the national security apparatus. Excuse me. Got my words out of order there for a second. And I thought that because of this, Paul Manafort would wind up the target and the source of Trump taking down, Trump being taken down, and oh, I see, they're just letting Trump and this guy do a bunch of illegal shit so they can fucking, make an example of him and reclaim the Republican Party, that kind of thing. Maybe even announce that all this shit that this far-right movement was spewing was Russian propaganda. They had the opportunity at that point to do so, and they missed it. And now what we've learned since then, from the many reports that Rachel Maddow compiles, is that Manafort has been doing a considerable level of money laundering and has been converting large amounts of financial liquid assets into rare and valuable collectible type items, supposedly to avoid taxation. But what I don't think her theory really includes is the necessity for moving that kind of cash in that time frame for the purposes that he needed it. It gives another interpretation of the data. You see, these are simply $2,000 toilet seats and $400 hammers on a much more massive scale. Well, on a much higher markup, I suppose. On a much classier scale. Yeah, there you go. On a much classier scale. For shizzle, my bizzle. That was me being classy. But anyways, Wild Cherry Pepsi is so fucking good. I want to crack open another one. Like right now. I'm really. Ooh. Oh, I haven't had one of those in so long. And the case has been sitting over there for fucking. What did they come? Almost a week now. I just had my first one. It's fucking delicious, okay? I'm just blown away by how delicious that shit is. It's been so fucking long. You can't really find Wild Cherry Pepsi that often, that easily. But it is a wonderful, luxurious item. Anyway. So, Manafort, he wasn't into Wild Cherry Pepsi. He was into tapestries and fucking Italian suits and ties and basically, if you look at how the Ukrainian oligarchs, namely Yanukovych, fuck, easy name to get backwards. Yanukovych, the guy that he worked for. If you look at the rating of his mansion by the citizens of Ukraine after the Maidan, after Yanukovych just fucking left Ukraine, what you have is a deja vu-like experience if you pay a lot of attention to things. What it reminded me of was when they raided Mullah Omar's crib. Remember that? When we had our little police force invading a country. We had 15,000 men invading a fucking country called Afghanistan. And we went to the leader of this pastoral, nomadic, village-based, humble people, and it was just like neon beer decorations and hookers and blow and like just cheesy, lavish, excessive, extravagant shit in this reclusive mansion in the middle of fucking nowhere in Afghanistan. And that was Mullah Omar Crib. And he was, he portrayed himself as this prophetesque leader. Always seen riding his own horse, carrying his own bag, that kind of thing. And it just seems a common thread with these people. Yep. That's one of the many different proofs that Mullah Omar was nothing more than one of these people. And the Saudi bin Laden construction group, I believe it was recently rebranded, well, several years ago now. But that was, or is now, ran by Dialysis Boy's brother. And the common thread that you're looking at here it's oligarchy. These people are business mobsters. And see, what the mob does is it establishes rackets. And those rackets are what gives life to, what gives definition to the very phrase mob. You see, mob rule is not democracy, because the mafia can control the mob. The mob can control the mob. You see, what a mafia boss, what a Russian mafia boss does, or an international mafia boss does, under the direction and or blessing of the Kremlin, isn't just going into the stores in a neighborhood and saying, I'd hate to see anything bad happen to this store, why don't you give me some money and I'll keep some, I'll keep these local hoodlums who happen to work for me away from your store. It's more than that. You see, the mafia, for a long time, has resorted to terrorist tactics on much smaller scales than really get reported. Something might just blow up to send a message to a whole neighborhood. Some politician they elected might get assassinated. And the list grows well beyond the limits of the imagination of Hollywood screenwriters. Now, when Manafort was working in Ukraine, it wasn't just a matter of people getting bribed. It was a matter of people getting scared. It was a matter of some people just disappearing. It was a coordinated assault that coordinated mob-based levels of ground game politically with the use of Russian media propaganda. And that combination of mob-like ground game, mob-like political ground game, and local radio media, talk show hosts, YouTube, Facebook targeting, propaganda. Okay. That's what he brought to the table directly. And Donald Trump being completely knowledgeable, even to the point where he appeared on Alex Jones. Let him supposedly volunteer to be the campaign chairperson.
Starting on Tuesday. Also in the GRU case, that bombshell indictment of 12 Russian military intelligence agents. We don't expect those Russian military intelligence agents to turn up anytime soon, but we are awaiting sort of some knock-on revelations that we expect to derive from that indictment. For example, that indictment of all those Russian military intelligence officers also says bluntly, on or about August 15, 2016, the conspirators, posing as Lucifer 2.0, meaning the Russian military intelligence guys, received a request for stolen documents from a candidate for the U.S. Congress. The conspirators responded and sent the candidate stolen documents related to the candidate's opponent. Based on the timing, this means this was a general election congressional candidate in 2016 who solicited and received stolen information on his or her opponent from Russian military intelligence ahead of the 2016 election. That American congressional candidate, who may or may not
I don't see that. Yeah, that's visible.
now be a serving member of Congress, hasn't yet been named. But based on this part of the indictment, clearly that is somebody who is known to the Justice Department.
You get the brightness under control.
And so we're waiting for that shoe to drop whenever the Justice Department chooses to drop it. And there's also the unnamed American who plays a starring, if somewhat romantically tragic role in the Maria Butina case. Maria Butina is the only Russian who's been indicted in the Russia scandal thus far, who's actually been arrested and is being held in U.S. custody. We expect to see her back in court in a few days. But since her indictment, the Washington Post has added some further reporting about U.S. Person 1, who was essentially described as a co-conspirator with her in that indictment. She's charged in that indictment with operating essentially as a secret agent of the Russian Federation in this country. Now, U.S. Person 1 has been identified in multiple news reports, but not by law enforcement. Multiple news reports say he is Paul Erickson, who's a conservative political activist with a long history in Republican politics. He was described in court yesterday by Maria Butina's defense lawyer as Maria Butina's boyfriend. That said, prosecutors have alleged in their court filings that it might not actually be true love. That they have documentation that indicates that, at least from Butina's perspective, their personal relationship, their living together, was not a sincere love affair. It was something she was doing somewhat resentfully as part of her covert influence operation for the Russian government. Well, according to the Washington Post's reporting on Erickson, on U.S. Person 1, check this out. Erickson lobbied for a role in Trump's transition team and complained after the election when he ran into a problem with his security clearance. Since we now know he was sleeping with a Russian spy, I'm kind of happy about the security clearance process in that case, just as an aside. Anyway, quote, even without official credentials, though, Erickson pressed Trump donors and former campaign officials, pushing for top positions for other people. One person recalled his lobbying to get K.T. McFarland named as an advisor to Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor, Michael Flynn. So again, this is U.S. Person 1, a person who is named in this latest indictment in the Russia scandal as cohabitating with and essentially being a co-conspirator with this accused Russian secret agent who's now being held in jail awaiting trial in Washington. According to the Washington Post's reporting, this guy, who was very personally involved in her and potentially in on her scheme, he recommended that the new Deputy National Security Advisor should be K.T. McFarland. That was an unusual choice. K.T. McFarland had been involved in Republican politics. She had worked in earlier Republican White Houses, but when I say earlier, I mean like way, way, way earlier. And since then, she's been an occasional contributor to Fox News, but she's barely on the periphery of even weird Trumpian national security politics.
What the fuck kind of a name is KT? Hold on. Alright, let's see here. Farland, fuck it, Wikipedia, whatever. Kathleen Troya. Huh. Her fucking name is fake. Kathleen M. Troya. Born Kathleen M. Troya, July 22nd, 1951. So K.T. McFarland is actually Kathleen Troya. We have Wikipedia, you know, I mean, for fuck's sake. Let's just see here. Right now, fuck. Troya, T-R-O-I-A. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. It literally means Trojan horse. That is fucking hilarious. So, just in case you're not understanding, Troya isn't her name either. It was her parents' name. But it wasn't their parents' name. This is something that Satanists do. The more they do it, the more they exert themselves, according to each other's understanding of power, essentially. See, according to their understanding of power, by taunting people with the obvious and proving to each other how much they can mock them in their own stupidity and ignorance, they are actually gaining and sort of getting a high off of power over the mundanes, if you will. Sort of a psychic vampirism. Kathleen Troya. The name is bullshit. There is no Troya last name. There is no Troya family. That's why the Googling results are just indicative of what the fuck it sounds like. Because before she was ever sent to Fox News, people were sent to the internet to make shit up. Just make shit up. That's all it is. That's just Verona. Really? A name from Verona, Italy. Oh yeah. She was friends with Tybalt. Yeah. Yeah. From the Trojan War. Oh, yeah. Because that really happened. Jeez.
Not a high-profile figure. Not a heavyweight figure by any stretch of the imagination. But nevertheless, after recommendations in part from Maria Butina's fake boyfriend, K.T. McFarland was elevated to a very high-level job in the Trump White House. Deputy National Security Advisor essentially runs the national security process inside the White House. It's the operations officer who runs the whole National Security Council and runs intelligence through the national security process. The National Security Council is hundreds of people. Being Deputy National Security Advisor is the kind of job where you work 30 hours. K.T. McFarland always seemed like an odd fit for that job.
Secretary of Knobgoblin.
They gave her that job. We now know, in part, on the recommendation of Maria Butina's boyfriend. She did not last long in that job, though. K.T. McFarland left in the backwash after National Security Advisor Mike Flynn was fired a month into the new administration, and then he was later criminally charged in conjunction with the Mueller investigation related to his contacts with the Russian government. Okay, so this pries open a whole new thing. You remember how the Flynn disaster unfolded, right? Just a few days after the Trump inauguration, not even a week into the new administration, Flynn was interviewed by the FBI at the White House about contacts he had with the Russian government.
Not just contacts. Improper payments from the Russian government. Awards received. Commendations. Thanks, gratitude. Praise received by the Russian government. And affiliation with Russian propaganda network RT. Coincidentally enough, along with these affiliations, he also seemed to be affiliated with all of the other people that worked with Russian propagandists in the pseudo-conservative fascist movement of 2016 and 2016, and basically ever since Obama got elected. You know, it's pretty easy conspiracy to get together, because all you have to do is find people who are racist. And Russia knows this. They take advantage of this concept even in their own country, setting ethnic groups against each other. They do it with neighboring countries all the time. And we'd be pretty naive to think that they wouldn't be perfectly adept at doing it here. How did General Flynn, a honorable United States general, get pulled into a Russian coup and assist the installation of an international mobster as our dictator, as our puppet dictator, in typical Russian puppet dictator fashion, as if he were not aware of what a Russian puppet dictator was. Very simple. One day, an illegal, a Russian agent, perfectly blended into American society, caught him talking about niggers. And that's all it fucking took. That's all it took. And they probably got him on tape doing it too. Oh yeah, they probably got him on tape talking about niggers and saying niggers and this and that. Just a racist, crazy fucking... I mean, picture that guy. He's an angry little man. I mean... I think I have an image of him. Just kind of demonstrates my point there. Where is it? Totally should have had this ready. I don't know why he'd be talking about Mike Flynn and not just want to put this right up on the board. Where is it, fucker? Where is my Mike Flynn selfie? He's the cell phone strangler of East Dublin. You can't just not have the fucking image up. Oh man, it's gone. Where the hell is it? I got that one. I need to meme that. For sure. The future. Where the hell? Really? I don't even have to copy it under jokes. Not even under jokes. you know, that's how I feel about that. That's in the jokes folder. Also, that is in the jokes folder. I could be a special boy sometimes. A lot of times. But seriously, where the fuck? How can... It has to be somewhere in here. This isn't right. I had it in this folder. I tweeted it out so it should be in the other folder. And it's just not on my fucking computer anymore. I refuse to believe this shit. There should be multiple copies on this computer. Multi-pics. Where are you, little leprechaun? Is a hobbit like a leprechaun when they're younger? You know, they get old, get too much fur on their feet to really walk around anymore. They go far from the cave. They join the Shriners, they start dressing funny. Next thing you know, leprechaun. And you know, old age, saving up for retirement, always fucking guarding their pot of gold. Just an elderly hobbit. This particular elderly hobbit is apparently eluding me. What the fuck is that? Oh look, it's my campaign advertisement for Trump 2020. Too dry? Yeah, we're all gonna fucking die, is what I'm trying to say. No, but this isn't right. Where the fuck is my cell phone strangler of East Dublin? I can't live without that name. It's crucial to my, it's crucial to my balls. Crucial to my existence as a hobbit, or leprechaun, or whatever. Gandalf? Yeah, something. How in... I'm not overlooking this shit. Wait, what? line by line through every fucking folder where I have all these stupid images that I always share. And right where it always is, it is not there. Huh. This is boggling my mind. I mean, not necessarily like shocked, like a hacker would come and steal an image or something, but, you know, just, why that one? That doesn't make any fucking sense. I guess it was just too funny for him. That doesn't make any sense either. I'm not that fucking funny. This is what I mean by one does not really watch the Lost Begotten chapter. Well, I thought it was clever. So, this, thing I'm looking for, it's supposed to be in this folder here, like right there-ish. In fact, that makes sense, because right there-ish. Is F. Let's see, it would be in fact there-ish. No. Lead him there. So in this area would normally be Flynn. Tweet outs. Nothing. Ah! I found a copy. Now, I can move on with my fucking life. Because I have found the cell phone strangler of East Dublin. Okay. Now, what were you saying about him, Rachel?
2 days after that FBI interview, the acting Attorney General of the United States, Sally Yates, called the White House counsel's office and expressed with some urgency that there was a matter of serious national security concern that she needed to discuss in person with the White House counsel. She went in person to the White House, she met with the White House counsel in a secure office space, and she delivered to the White House counsel the Justice Department's serious concerns about Mike Flynn related to his contacts with the Russian government, and most urgently, the Justice Department's belief that he, while serving in that incredibly sensitive job with access to the highest classified information in the U.S. government, the Justice Department believed he was actually, at that moment, compromised by the Russian government. The Russian government had leverage over him that they could potentially use to compel him to do, take your pick, hand over secrets, take action against the national security interest of the United States, I mean, whatever the Russians might want him to do. They had leverage on him. He was compromised. Sally Yates goes to the White House counsel's office with that urgent warning. And even to this day, we still do not have very much clarity about why they then kept him on as national security advisor for another 18 days.
Because they were all compromised.
18 months since then, we still don't know why.
How fucking obvious do you need that to be?
Sally Yates later explained, both in testimony to the Senate and in public interviews, that she was somewhat flummoxed by that White House decision to keep him on.
Very concerned about the underlying conduct and went through and explained the compromise situation with the Russians and told him specifically that we were giving him this information so that they could act. And we felt like
it was a national security threat.
Absolutely.
You have no doubt about that.
I don't think anybody in the intel community has a doubt about that.
You wanted the White House to act.
Absolutely, yes.
To do something.
We expected the White House to act.
Did you expect them to act quickly?
Yes.
There was urgency to the information.
Yes.
Do you think Michael Flynn should have been fired?
Whether he's fired or not is a decision for the President of the United States to make. But it doesn't seem like that's a person who should be sitting in the National Security Advisor position.
If you hadn't been fired, if you were still in your position, and you hadn't seen any action over the course of that 18 days, was there more your role as the acting Attorney General would have permitted you to do?
Oh, I would have gone back to the White House.
If you were still the acting Attorney General, you would have gone back to the White House.
I would have been knocking on the door again, yes.
Why?
Because I would have been concerned that we had a National Security Advisor who was compromised. I wouldn't have been able to control what happened, but I would have gone back to him.
What sort of questions would you have asked?
What have you done?
It's been a mystery all along. Clearly a somewhat frustrating mystery to Sally Yates herself all along. Why the White House didn't act for more than 2 weeks after this very urgent national security threat was brought to their attention. But now, 18 months later, right, another part of this is unfolding. In December, we learned that despite assurances from the White House that Mike Flynn had acted alone, that his contacts with the Russian government had been the act of sort of a rogue official, nobody else knew what he was doing. We learned in December that in fact he hadn't acted alone. His deputy, K.T. McFarland, had known about Flynn's secret contacts with the Russian government before, during, and after those contacts happened. She helped set them up. These are the same contacts with the Russian government that he pled guilty to lying to the FBI about. K.T. McFarland would also later lie about her knowledge of Flynn's contact with the Russian government when she was questioned about it by the U.S. Senate. One of the weird long tails of this story is that after she got ousted as Deputy National Security Advisor following the Flynn debacle, the Trump administration actually for a while tried to name her an ambassador. As part of the confirmation process for her would-be ambassadorship, she appears to have lied to the U.S. Senate and denied any knowledge of Flynn's contact with the Russian government. Her emails from the transition show, in fact, she knew about those contacts. She was in on it. Flynn was not acting alone. Flynn was not even alone in lying about those contacts with the Russian government. K.T. McFarland did it too.
Oh.
And now, as of now, based on this new reporting from the Washington Post, we know that U.S. Person 1, reportedly Paul Erickson, Maria Butina's fake boyfriend, who prosecutors say she was romantically involved with as part of her covert operation to serve as an agent of the Russian government in this country. Maria Butina's just for the sake of spying boyfriend, according to the Washington Post, he's the one who recommended K.T. McFarland for that job in the first place, which is a job you really might have not ever expected her to get. Sally Yates was acting Attorney General when she tried to warn the White House with urgency about a senior official in the Trump White House being compromised by the Russian government. She was driven by the urgency of needing to get that official out of there because of the danger that represented to our country. The White House, we know at the time, didn't see it that same way. How does it change that story? How does it affect our understanding of that lack of urgency on the part of the Trump White House to now know that Flynn wasn't alone? That Flynn's deception on this issue was not on something in which he was acting alone. And at least obliquely, there appears to be a connection to an illegal Russian influence operation, which the Justice Department apparently just broke up with this new indictment. Sally Yates is the first person from whom we Americans got the news about people at the highest level in this Trump administration being compromised by the Russian government.
I love Sally Yates' accent. I lived in Texas for 7 years. And, you know, I didn't plan living there for that long, so I could just say that I lived in Texas for 7 years and sound all Jesus-y or anything. But, yep, just happens to be 7 years I lived in Texas. And, that accent that she's got there, pretty damn hard to fake. In fact, I'd be surprised if there was anyone who could actually fake it. People with that accent, generally speaking, live in northwest Louisiana, southwest Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the entire northern half of Texas. Also known as the Heartland. And what I mean by the specific commonality that's hard to fake is that thread that unifies accents in those areas. It sounds like they're gritting their teeth when they're not. It's kind of hard to explain. And it's really prevalent when you have a female that has a pronounced version of it. Like you can really, I don't know, you can really appreciate it. I had a lot of female teachers in Texas that had that accent. It's just kind of cool to hear it again. But at the same time, man, an actor or a impersonator would be hard pressed to try to have an intellectual conversation in that accent without sounding like a hillbilly. So I have no doubt that she is an authentic American with authentic American concerns. In fact, what a president she would make. All right, let me try to remember that. Fucking Sally Yates 2020. Yeah, that'd be fucking poetic justice. That is a fine woman.
Government while they served as U.S. officials. Today, that warning has a whole new resonance. Sally Yates joins us for the interview. Next.
Well, cool. We got to see the interview. Mostly, kinda. Let's see if we can get it not edited to shit.
Back with us now for the interview with Sally Yates. She's the former acting Attorney General of the United States. Thank you again for being here. Last month, we got to see a letter that was sent to the special counsel's office from the president's lawyers and ended up getting published in the New York Times. And that letter included references to you, references to memos that the White House counsel Don McGahn had written about his interactions with you about Mike Flynn. And in those memos, at least according to the president's lawyers, he says that when you came to the White House to warn about the possible compromise of Flynn as national security advisor, you never indicated to him that Flynn was actually under investigation. The lawyer letter cites the quote, White House understanding that there was no FBI investigation of Flynn. And that seems like maybe a fine point. The reason it ends up being important, and the reason the president's lawyers are writing about it to the special counsel's office, is because I think there's an idea that it may look more like obstruction of justice on the part of the president if when he went to the FBI director and said lay off Flynn, he knew there was an open FBI investigation into Michael Flynn. So the White House counsel saying you never indicated that Flynn was the subject of an investigation. Can you shed any light on that?
Well, yeah, when I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, I talked about the two different meetings that I had with Mr. McGahn. And in the first meeting, Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not the investigation was criminal or whether or not it was a counterintelligence investigation.
So she referenced...
And I declined to answer that.
Okay.
And then I also testified that in the follow-up meeting the next day, he wanted to know whether if they took any action, whether that would negatively impact the investigation, because they didn't want to negatively impact anything that was going on in the investigation. So he and I talked back and forth in both meetings about impact on an investigation.
And if the president, in that context, having been advised, presumably by his White House counsel, that there was an investigation concerning the national security advisor, if the president then went to the director of the FBI and said, ease up on Mike Flynn, who he knows is the subject of an investigation, how much ambiguity is there? How much legal wiggle room is there as to whether or not that was an effort to obstruct that investigation?
You know, I'm not going to get into sort of a legal definition of obstruction there, because I think that's really up to Bob Mueller and his folks to make that determination. But certainly, from what we know about that, it sounds like that there was an effort to influence the investigation.
I mentioned at the top of the show that there's been some new reporting related to a new indictment that's been handed down, actually not by the special counsel's office, but within the National Security Division of the Justice Department, about this alleged secret Russian agent, Maria Butina, and her involvement with a U.S. person who's been identified sort of circumstantially in press reports. What's been reported by the Washington Post is that that person who was involved with this alleged Russian agent recommended the Deputy National Security Advisor for her post, K.T. McFarland. Since the Flynn investigation, since the Flynn affair and your role in it, we have learned that Mr. Flynn doesn't appear to have been acting alone when he contacted the Russian government. And in fact, when he made those contacts that he later pled guilty to lying to the FBI about, Ms. McFarland appears to have been involved not only in knowing about them, but in setting those up. She also appears to have not been truthful with the Senate when she was asked about those. If Flynn wasn't acting alone, does that change anything materially, does that make the case about Flynn resonate in any more or less worrying way? If there was somebody else who was involved with him and he wasn't on his own?
Well, I don't know if it's more or less worrying. I mean, certainly if there are other people who are involved in this, then our Justice Department ought to want to find that out, to get to the bottom of that. And it sounds like that's exactly what's going on right now with Special Mueller's investigation on this, and with General Flynn's cooperation on this as well.
He's awaiting sentencing. His sentencing's been pushed back a few times. What is, as observers, what should we read into that?
That is common when someone is still continuing to provide information or to cooperate in other ways in the investigation, that you put off their sentencing until all of the cooperation is complete, so that the judge, when he or she is sentencing the defendant, has the benefit of knowing everything that they did in an effort to try to assist the government in cooperation.
So the longer it goes on, the more cooperation we can infer.
Yes.
Yeah, roughly speaking. We'll be right back with Sally Yates, former Acting Attorney General of the United States. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching
That's all we
MSNBC
get.
on YouTube.
Come on, man. Let's watch some fail videos. So, oh, that's cute. A little morph of Trump and Putin's face. They're on the top left there. I gotta wonder if, anybody other than Trump himself entertained the idea that we would submit Ambassador Michael McFaul, who, let's just say, I have a great personal affection for. Based upon paranoid conspiracy theories generated by Russian propaganda. That have been ongoing for such an extensive time that for Donald Trump to have entertained such an idea as possibly being perceived as rational, he must have been regularly influenced by said Russian propaganda for a considerable period of time. And that brings us back to the whole Alex Jones interview and friendship. 9/11 involvement. Etc. Jake Tapper, what the hell is going on? That could be funny.
Another day, another about face from the White House. Today, responding to the avalanche of outrage over President Trump considering the request from President Vladimir Putin for Russian interrogators to question a list of Americans, including former ambassador to Moscow, Michael McFaul. It is a proposal that was made in sincerity by President Putin, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said in a statement, but President Trump disagrees with it.
That's not going to happen.
Also ruling out giving Russia access to McFaul and the others.
And with respect to the particular question, the administration is not going to force Americans to travel to Russia.
See, what I suppose Russian trolls who don't enjoy American citizenship or understand it, like Donald Trump fails to understand it, is that unlike Russians, we have rights. Actual rights. They're not imaginary, despite all the propaganda that makes it seem like, citizens can just be whisked away for national security reasons and nobody ever hears. No. That's not true.
Not to be interrogated by Vladimir Putin and his team.
Putin's proposal, made in his one-on-one meeting with Trump in Helsinki, was to allow Robert Mueller's team to interview the 12 Russians indicted for cyber attacks in the 2016 election. In exchange, Russian investigators would get to question McFaul and 11 others for crimes Russia accuses them of. A deal that Trump at first found intriguing.
And what he did is an incredible offer. He offered to have the people...
I said that for the sole purpose of seeing if the Russian troll who just joined us would lose interest. Turns out it was effective.
Working on the case, come and work with their investigators. That's an incredible offer.
The White House saying Wednesday it was being considered.
There was some conversation about it, but there wasn't a commitment made on behalf of the United States, and the president will work with his team, and we'll let you know if there's an announcement on that front.
McFaul, at the center of the firestorm, was stunned.
My government, I hope, will step up today and categorically swat this back. And when I mean my government, I mean my President of the United States of America.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle angry the proposal was even being discussed.
The concept of letting American citizens being investigated for crimes that are just, I think, are jokes is absurd. And I don't believe there's one member, I challenge you to find one member of the House and the Senate that believes this is a good idea.
No president should have the power to gift-wrap American citizens, let alone former ambassadors, to our known adversaries.
Jay, Congress, as you heard right there, found this proposal so outrageous that just moments ago the Senate voted 98-0 against making current and former officials available for interrogation by the Russians. Ambassador McFaul has thanked the Senate in a tweet saying that bipartisanship is not yet dead. But at the same time, he also took a swipe at the White House, which had called Putin's offer sincere, saying, "I don't consider it sincerity to falsely accuse U.S. government officials of being criminals." Jake.
All right, Alex Marquardt, thanks so much. What the hell is going on? Seriously, what the hell is going on? Sincerity, sincere offer from Putin, and an incredible offer to... I'm looking at you so you answer the question, not because you're defending it, but just... What?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's kind of my reaction, too. Obviously, what they're trying to do is send the message that they're serious about the 12 people who have been indicted, 12 Russian government officials, that they want to do something about that, right? But in the process of trying to communicate that, somehow they've given validity to a proposal by Vladimir Putin that I don't know anyone who thinks that would be anywhere remotely acceptable to even have the conversation about. I don't send diplomats over to be interrogated for crimes.
It already crimes. What's the crime?
Exactly.
Just made up. If Michael McFaul didn't commit any crimes. This is one of the issues that Republicans and national security experts have with Donald Trump, and it used to be something that people said about the left, which is this moral equivalence. He thinks that the United States and Russia are on the same moral plane.
Well, and I don't know if that's the belief or not. I know that's, I'm more of a conspiracy theorist than you think. So I'm going to go back to my word from the last segment, compromise. But I would also say that narcissism is blinding. Let's say that he's not compromised. I'm going to give that. Perhaps. If he's not, then that means that he's so narcissistic that he can't even potentially accept the fact that, as has been proven at this point, Russia interfered with the U.S. election because they favored him. James Clapper talked about this. The fact that he just can't accept this idea. That is now causing great harm to our national security. It's causing great harm to, I believe, confidence in him, even from his party. I think that there are folks who have actually said they don't approve of the way the summit was handled. And what was said in the meeting? You're talking about what the hell happened?
We have no idea. Michael, you work for George W. Bush. If Vladimir Putin said to George W. Bush, we can work during that early time when Bush was trying to have a relationship with him, he looked into his soul and all that. If he had said, that's fine, we can work on this and such, but I need you to turn over Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton's previous ambassador, and these 11 individuals, and then we can talk. What would George W. Bush have said to that? And what would, I guess it was Ari Fleischer have said from the podium?
Well, they would have been gobsmacked. They would have fallen out of their chair. They wouldn't have known what to do. I mean, speaking of White House staff this week, I mean, wow, they must be exhausted. They have to wrestle all week to get the president back to the starting line. NATO is good. Russia is bad. And no, we aren't turning over American citizens for interrogation to the Russians. And so this is a lot of effort they have to expend to get back to the starting line.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, and you saw the State Department obviously come out and say this is absurd. You saw Pompeo speaking very strongly there. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders, again, the whole idea of the audience of one. She didn't want to get out ahead of the president because the president had said this was an incredible offer at some point. He said it, I think, a couple of times in that press conference. Seemed to be excited about the idea of it. Oh, this is a great idea to have the criminals as part of the criminal investigation. And this idea that you mentioned, that somehow the Russian justice system, which doesn't really exist, is on par with the democratic justice system that we have. You think about Michael McCall. This is a guy who got death threats, right? I mean, there are all sorts of salacious and terrible things that they spread about this guy while he was ambassador. Complete lies. And this idea, I mean, who would be next? Michael McCall? Would Hillary Clinton be next on that list?
He would be real happy about that.
God, don't tempt
Yeah, he's watching now. Thank you. He's got to go
Thanks for the idea, yeah.
If the president wants to have a relationship with Russia, it needs to be on our terms, not on Putin's, not on these absurd things that he's putting forward. It's fine. It's in the president's call. He won the election. Let's have a normal bilateral relationship on nuclear arms and talk about Iran and North Korea and the rest. But no more of this stuff. And so we've got to get, he's coming here in the fall. We'll see what the agenda is. It sounds like a do-over.
Oh great, now my dad's sending me images. Welcome back, Lacey. So, I was just talking about how people who didn't grow up in this country and don't understand what it means to be an American citizen might be under the impression that we would just fucking deport one of our own ambassadors so that they can be interrogated by the Russians. Lacey, why would you be sorry for saying everything is so fucked up? That's what I'm here for. How fucked up it is. And I'll try my best to make you feel better. And if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I'll try to help you find it. Of course, if it's private, you can just talk to me about it on Facebook. But if it's something you think that other people might be able to learn from, talk about it here. But you're right. Everything is pretty fucked up. It's nice that my little political spree on Twitter hasn't gone unnoticed. And I've been hearing the people that I've been tweeting to speaking a lot more like the tweets I've been sending. And that's rather refreshing. It's good to be seen, even if I have to go incognito to do so. Kind of pseudo-incognito, if you will. And at the same time, it really is that blind pridefulness. The fact that without being a slave of deceit on a metaphysical level, that is, without the god of deceit having dominion over the god of pride, self-deceit due to pride becomes almost the default state of the deceiver. And that's why you have these assholes parading around like they're bulletproof when they're not. Yeah, I mean, I don't like to just say have faith in the method of the madness, but usually for me, prayer, as far as that need for faith goes, is a matter of surrendering the limits of my understanding, you know, like, okay, I have a feeling that I should have faith here. But that's not to say that there is no intellectual understanding that can be had to give reason behind this feeling. It's just that there's part of my brain right now. Okay, look at it this way. There's part of your brain in that moment that's connecting the dots subconsciously. It's like when you know how much time has passed right before the microwave's going to beep, even though you weren't counting in your head. Your brain has figured out this thing on a subconscious level, and you can't quite put it into words that your conscious brain can understand, especially not that you could communicate to another person. But you have a feeling these fuckers are up to something, or something like that. And just because you go at it on faith even though you can't come up with the answer at the time. Doesn't mean there's no answer there. Doesn't mean that it wasn't logical to do so. It's just a matter of balancing heart with instinct. Because your subconscious brain can trigger the impulses of your heart by recognizing patterns. And when that pattern recognition impulse and your heart coincide, when you feel like they're up to no good, I need to protect people by making note of this, by having faith in this, by doing that. And you can, in general, be led down a path. I don't know how to explain it. You can be led down a path that can train you to understand faith better and to have more reliable instincts when it comes to listening to what your heart says and what God's trying to tell you and what you need to be doing. Guided by a greater instinct. And that tuning of intuition No, but it's a process of having faith in something on instinct, like how you found this channel. You had faith on instinct that there was bullshit and someone out there could explain the fuckery, okay? Then you found me, and your faith was rewarded, and the fuckery was explained. So it's not as though faith should continue to go on making no sense. The whole purpose of faith should be to reward that instinct when it coincides with heart, when it coincides with good and the purposes of love. And when people are asking for faith, or when a religious leader is asking for faith that doesn't involve any of that, that's just kind of a, wear this kind of hat and you'll get to go to heaven fucking faith. That's the blind faith that I think people should be wary of. That's the faith that enslaves people. That's the faith of a false god. I mean, God doesn't want you to feel lost and without purpose. God didn't create people he loved for that. See, whenever you consider something that doesn't make sense, assume that it doesn't make sense, and move on and try to figure out something that does. People like to blame God for all sorts of things that simply is not his fault. They are results of the mechanism of free will that other beings have taken advantage of to advance their own lusts. What God wants you to do is feel found, not lost. Just feel like you have a unique sight that other people don't. Not feel like you're blinded. And the way to get that feeling, the way to get that capability, is to realize those times when you let go of what you were thinking. You let go of what men were telling you. And you put faith in God. You had that one, you know, you might have been, you know, late at night, a little tipsy, smoked a joint, something. Just felt an instinct. No, you know what? None of that really fucking makes sense, man. Fuck all that bullshit. I'm gonna try one last time to find somebody who has been further down this path than me, who God has fucking taught the shit that I want to be taught now. And God, if you're listening right now, find me that fucker, because I need his advice right now. And that's how you found me. Your faith was rewarded. So you don't have any reason to stress anymore. God proved himself to you. Okay? Now what you need to focus on is getting yourself in the shape in your life, in your social life, in your physical life, in your spiritual life, where God wants you to be. Yeah, and I hope I made it clear just how well connected I am to a process that you have told me nothing about, because I was on the other end of those prayers. Yeah, I think she just had a moment there. You are too beautiful of a person to be caught up by the demons of self-destruction. Do you understand me? No more. Yeah. See, that's the worst that I could possibly do. When recognized, is speak to someone as though I were their parent. Because I am. Anytime. So how do you like the little meme icon I made for it? One does not simply watch the Lost Begotten channel. That's good. Just don't tell me that. Tell the Father. These days, there's very little distinction. I think Lacey's of the understanding of the difference between father and mother. Just to disambiguate for anyone who's confusing the concept she's expressing with Scripture. Must be taken in the context. You see, in that context, the prayer that she would be required to say would be said to the mother. And for her to be committing hypocrisy in that context, she would have to be calling herself a mother. See, I just like to address those things because there actually will be viewers of these videos in the future who will wonder these things. One day. Indeed you have. You know what's really hard to fathom is the level of wrath and anger and the level of trauma experienced by humanity. And just the creepiness of the shape, of the form, of the manner, the communication level that was present when both of us were murdered 2,000 years ago. Split the fucking earth in two. Reformed an entire continent from a submerged coastal plain. Oh, 2 continents technically. Like a double continent. One giant fucking S. It also serves as a lovely paddle. Yes, a paddle. A part of a machine called Earth. This paddle, called the New World, stirs the atmosphere. And if it were not for this stirring, the capacity for life on this planet would have already been exceeded. And that's not just accounting for the additional vegetative mass and things like that. Although the stirring itself augments the vegetative mass, allowing for oxygenation of large volumes of water, which were not possible before the North and South American continents existed. Isn't that special? And of course, if you were to extrapolate this into a purely atheistic scientific model, you would see the same thing were true as a result of the deconformation of Pangea into the North and South American subcontinents and the effects it had on upper and lower atmospheric conditions. El Nino, Atlantic and subatlantic tropical currents, as well as Pacific easterlies. Yeah. Just in case you thought I was saying something on blind faith. It could take me probably fucking good hour and a half just to get out a second worth of thought is my general problem with communicating. Wait, let me pause and put that into words so people can hear. It doesn't work very well. Is that condescending or hilarious, Lacey? I'm not sure which one it would be. I kind of find it both. I don't know. It's like the very idea that I should be or even want to be quote-unquote godlike. First of all, I would have to have deceived myself, as per accordance with the previous lecture about pride. But also, that would reflect a preponderance of ignorance on my part, and represent a complete failure to understand the very mechanism of reality. What the star-crossed lovers are, why they exist, why God separated itself into male and female. Why God, even inhabiting the conscience of the male, would give more power to the female out of humility and love. You see, by this mechanism, I came first and created her. But then she created time and created me in turn. And by this mechanism, souls themselves can reproduce. There is a series of achievements throughout the reincarnation journey of a human soul that leads one to a certain level of maturity in which they find their soulmate. And the two of them realize that they were created as one soul, and that soul had become so powerful that it split apart. And then those two spirits, through ascension, find their way to an even greater journey back in humanity. And that is how both stars and souls are born. It would be an exercise in arrogance, in futility, as well as just obnoxious preposterousness. I don't even know how to describe it. Just control, just insecurity. Insecurity. It would be an exercise in insecurity. For someone, or for a god, for a hypothetical god, to want absolute control over creation. Now see, what's his name? Ari Melber. He likes to do the little rapper quotes, right? Well, let me just do like a gangsta analogy. Okay. See, a gangsta knows he's hot shit. Knows that the average motherfucker is just gonna drop. Knows that he's a hot knife cutting through butter. So guess what? Gangsta ain't acting all puffy. Shit. Gangsta's trying not to get fucking picked up and get his rap sheet checked. Gangsta's trying to fucking give back to charity. Maintain a low profile. Gangsta don't want nobody to know what he could do. Gangsta sees two little wannabe G's fighting, fronting on each other. Gangsta just kicks back on the bus and waits for the show. But if that gangsta sees them bitches about to knock an old lady over, gangsta's gonna show them what real gangsters be like. Now, if a god needs you to bow down to feel like God, he ain't very fucking gangster, is he? But you know, an old retired gangster sees a little kid acting a fool. He gets a different urge than what most people might think. You see, a dumbass sperm donor in his 20s or 30s might take a kid and think it's cute when they're acting a fool. Okay? But that motherfucker right there ain't never proven shit to nobody, especially not himself. That sperm donor never even really became a man before he got his dick wet. But you see, a gangster already knows he's a bad motherfucker. Already proven his shit. Already understands the consequences. And they know the difference between respect and stupidity. So they see a little boy smacking a little girl, and they say, "No, you do not, young man." And they tell him real gangsters don't do that shit. Now you see, if somebody comes here wanting people to revere them and think they're special and build statues and churches for them and shit like that, so they can feel like they're in control, so that they can be convinced themselves that they're in control, so that people are convinced that they're in control. That's indicative of two major things that prove that they're in no way even connected to God. One is that they don't have a plan that's connected to the very fabric of creation. And two, not gangster. You see, the definition of God is not just that he can create the universe with a word, but that he can destroy it. And the very concept that it ever existed, and start all over again. So when you see somebody walking around like they're swinging that big of a dick, they might be the baby Jesus. I did that just to make Lacey laugh so hard she would pee on herself. And when she's done laughing, she will go change her drawers. And, yeah. She snorted. I bet you that was adorable. Trump News Network Putin Summit by Jimmy Fallon. Oh, that's got to be hilarious. Can't put that on, though. That's not news. That's not fair use. And they already fuck with me about shit that is fair use. So, I'm not going to go there. Just prop me up beside the jukebox if I die. Love you too, honey. And you know, you should fucking know by now, when you're feeling off, come by here and bug me. If I ain't streaming, you always ask me to. Oi. Oi. CBS says that Trump now blames Putin for Russia meddling in the election. At the same time, he's inviting Putin to the White House. It's just fucking, really? What?
All right, so after the Helsinki horror show, President Trump should have reversed course. But he sees that as weakness. So instead, he's doubling down and inviting Putin back to his house, literally bringing him to Washington, D.C. this fall. This is like a bad movie. When he told his family his new boyfriend was the town creep who broke into their house, he responded to their outrage by inviting Vlad home for the holidays. That's what's going on. This is the Sarah Sanders tweet. Take a look at it. Those discussions are already underway. The Director of National Intelligence hadn't even been told about this. This is the mom, he already bought his ticket part of this melodrama movie. So what are they going to do when they're here? That's the plot. And Trump says, well, he's changed. Putin wants to help on terrorism. He wants to help secure Israel and nuclear proliferation, stop cyber attacks, Middle East peace, North Korea, and even something about Ukraine. It's all in the tweets verbatim. But there's also conflict here, right? Because there's nothing that's going to be on the table that Russia doesn't like about its malevolence around the world. Stopping cyber attacks? You're going to be partners with the person who victimized you. So Ukraine, no mass murder in Ukraine with MH17. I will never forget how I saw Russian separatists treat the dead there. Nothing about Syrian violence against innocents. How about what Trump is ignoring this week? That's going to be the subplot in this movie, that Trump is blind to the signs. Just this week, accused Russian spy, working the NRA, different righty groups allegedly trying to get close to Trump by exchanging sex for access. And today, British authorities identified the suspects in the UK poisoning case, and guess what they saw via surveillance footage? They say the two suspects left the UK for Russia after the poisoning. Coincidence? Maybe to Trump. Not the time to invite Putin into our house. And there's just one chance that can make this all okay. The climax is Trump season. Is that everything that he's doing, all the kid gloves, the mollycoddling, and everything else, is to work with Putin to save the world from nuclear proliferation. Now, if that's the trade-off for all of this
curious weakness and submissiveness to an autocrat, that might be okay. But there are two pieces of video that make a mushroom cloud of that mission at this point. The first was when Putin sent missiles to Florida. You remember that? In the Chris Wallace interview, he says, well, it doesn't say Florida on it. We don't know. It's a landmass, looks just like Florida. He was punking Trump, and it worked. Trump said nothing about it. And then, just this week, you want to talk about strategic limitation arms? Well, then why did they do this? Why did they show some of their munitions that should be stopped under those kinds of talks? So, the only way that this is okay is if Trump makes it an open house. There have to be tons of voices in the room. Sounds reasonable, but here's the problem. To Trump, it's going to sound weak again. He wants to be the big man in the room, the same way he felt in Helsinki. So there you have it. The plot, the conflict, the subplot, the climax, the anticlimax. The only question is, how does it end? We will see. We do know this. Putin is still up to no good, and now it looks like he's coming to your home for the holidays.
It's day 3 of the fallout from the Helsinki summit. The questions still keep coming about exactly what went on behind closed doors between Trump and Putin. Of course, one outcome we do know is that possible visit to Washington by the Russian president we learned about today, but almost everything else, that's a mystery. As we showed you before the break, here's what former CIA Chief of Russia Operations Steve Hall posted yesterday on Twitter. He said, from a counterintelligence perspective, something is going on behind the scenes. Before Helsinki, I was less sure. Post-Helsinki, I feel sick. Steve Hall joins me now, along with Rolf Moet Larsen, like Steve, a former CIA officer who also spent a good deal of time in Moscow. Steve, you choose your words carefully. What makes you feel sick?
You know, before the Helsinki summit, I was not prepared to go to the darkest corner in the room and say, there is compromising information on Donald Trump. But then after I saw him together with Vladimir Putin, the murderer, the person who has done, the standard litany of things that we're now all
What the fuck do you people do with your time?
And I saw Donald Trump treat him in a fashion that is just inexplicable. The only conclusion that I can come to is, and I would disagree with one of your former guests, I think there is information and data out there that implies that there is indeed compromising information that Vladimir Putin has on Donald Trump. Look, why else would he treat him this way? Donald Trump has been pretty tough with the Chinese. There's an impending trade war. He's been pretty tough with Rocket Man when they were comparing the size of their buttons. So it's not as though Donald Trump has any problem being tough with people. The question is, why not be tough with a guy like Vladimir Putin? And the only explanation that I can have is that he is concerned that the compromising information that Putin has on him will get out, because everybody else he treats very, very differently. That's kind of what sickens me.
Rolf, do you have that sense of sickness as well?
I would say that I agree with Steve's description of the symptoms, but I'm not sure I understand the cause. In other words, I'm not prepared to go there in terms of saying that the president is influenced directly by any compromising material the Russians have. But what I would add to Steve's commentary is that in a way it doesn't matter. The fact is that we cannot proceed with any realistic expectation that we can improve relations with the Russians if the president is not prepared to take a hard line with Vladimir Putin. I mean, his entire national security community is essentially in opposition to him and waging this really horrible struggle to watch to both support the president, who they serve, as well as their conviction that we need to confront the Russians. And as a matter of fact, if you look at the decades of history between the U.S. and Russia and the Cold War to today, I don't think there's ever been a period where we've been able to achieve any progress in relations, except when we've been tough with one another. We have to remember that when President Ronald Reagan confronted the Russians in the beginning, it was from the approach of Russia, Soviet Union representing an evil empire. That, in fact, was a necessary precondition for the progress that was made with President Gorbachev. After that, the hard line faded into the relationship that they were able to afford. So I think if President Trump believes that he can develop a friendship with Putin that's based not on reality, as his intelligence community and law enforcement community and policy community sees it, he's not only deluding himself, President Putin will not respect him for it.
Steve, it does seem like, I mean, everything about the Russians, people have always said is, it's you come at them from a position of strength. They respect strength. I just kept wondering what is going through, and it's possible no, but what is going through Vladimir Putin's mind when he's standing on that stage, listening to the president kind of go through all his greatest hits of all the things Vladimir Putin has no doubt read transcripts of the president saying before about his election victory and no collusion and all these things. I mean, the president is not a great poker player. He seems to give away everything that is actually in his head.
Sure, undoubtedly a very weak performance, and I would agree with Rolf that there's no reason not to go with the Russians tough. And then the question again rises: well, then why isn't he doing that? And to get to Rolf's other question that many have asked, so what is this compromise? What is this information? And, the salacious tapes, all of that stuff, I don't think that concerns Trump. I don't think that concerns his base. But go back and look at the finances. Donald Trump has been doing business, and his organization has been doing business by his son's own admission, and if you go back and look at the records, for years. What is the most important thing for Donald Trump? Not being a rich man. It's the ego satisfaction. It's being the tycoon. It's being the biggest, best deal maker of all. And to have somebody like Vladimir Putin who can say, you know what, guess who was behind that? Guess who bailed you out? Guess who helped you out via Deutsche Bank and other mechanisms when you were really having trouble? That was the Russians. That's what they hold over him. That is Donald Trump's vulnerability. And that is why he is not being tough with the Russians.
Rolf, two just quick things. One, when the president says nobody's been tougher on Russia than he has, his supporters point to, there were some Russian mercenaries were killed in a battle in Syria by U.S. forces, the bombing of an airfield in Syria, supplying weapons to Ukraine. Do you buy that nobody's been tougher on Russia than Donald Trump? And also, I mentioned at the top of the program, the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein today said that the attacks from Russia are persistent, pervasive, and ongoing, meant to undermine American democracy. How serious do you take that warning?
I have to come to the reluctant conclusion that the president is either delusional in ignoring all the advice he's getting from his key advisors about what the Russians are really doing, continually casting renewed doubts, and then trying to, in a way, convince himself that he's being tough by making new statements that he's the toughest president, when that is just so patently ridiculous, frankly. I don't want to sound disrespectful. But I think that raises another key question. When you watch the summit,
Hold on. He pulled our troops out of Syria, then notified the Russians ahead of time where we would strike. And there's been no confirmation of who any of the people killed were.
Contrast between President Trump and Putin could not have been clearer. President Putin also adopted an unusual, I would say, approach or demeanor in which he became very bitter. Many of his comments were very bitter. He offered these two ridiculous proposals that he had to understand were completely unacceptable to the entire U.S. national security establishment in calling for the Mueller investigation to be interviewed in Russia. It's a slap in the face of the Mueller investigation. The only person that would appeal to
what the fuck is you even talking about?
The only person I could think of is the president himself.
Yeah. And it did appeal to him, and the president said on the stage, frankly, that it was
He said it was incredible. He said it was a great idea.
Right, twice he referred to that.
That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, Rolf Moe, Larson, Steve Hall, thank you so much. Really fascinating.
Wow. Trump derangement syndrome? You mean patriotism? newsy people.
The Justice Department has a plan to combat interference in the 2018 election cycle. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said Thursday the DOJ will publicly alert companies, organizations, or individuals
So, the DOJ is to publicly call out present election interference. So as to raise the alert level for this coming election. Oh, and yes, of course, if you haven't heard, Facebook is only coming after people specifically who, quote, are saying things that could lead to violence, even if that violence includes defending America. Unless, of course, you're part of some Holocaust-denying organization, because that doesn't have anything to do with fucking violence. But basically, this whole thing that they're talking about with the Holocaust deniers won't be banned. And people who are directly expressing things that could lead to violence will be banned. That's their way of masking and excusing banning actual patriots who have a problem with being ruled by Russia. Period. That's it. That's the only fucking motivation behind this policy. It's the only motivation behind Google's algorithm in general. And if you ever wondered what kind of shit people would have to do to go to hell, no mental disease, no developmental disorder, no problem of circumstance, no chip on someone's shoulder could ever warrant the level of punishment that these people have knowingly earned. And what it all comes down to is, well, at a certain point you've got to make a promise, and then you've got to keep it. I've promised them eternal damnation if they do not repent completely of their actions. I'm a man of my word. Jill Stein recount cash used for her Russia legal bills. Ain't that a bitch? New York State investigating Trump Foundation. refer those findings for criminal prosecution, is what it says. Well, wouldn't that be lovely? I think what's going to happen is it's going to be multiple districts are all going to come to the district attorney's office at once. I mean, the attorney general's office at once, and give him no choice but to arrest the traitor. But, you know, when building a case, there needs to be just no doubt. And continuing to allow Trump to incriminate himself is eliminating all possible avenues for doubt quite effectively. And there's a couple more opportunities coming along that could prove interesting. But I think once those are done, it's time to tug on the rope. Microsoft is experiencing a financial turnaround thanks to, quote, cloud-fueled earnings. Well, gee. One would think that Google Cloud services were being perceived as possibly less than reliable.
When I talk about these forces in the United States, you know, this is not in line with our political philosophy, because we've always been taught that people who work for the state in the interest of their nation should first and foremost think about the fundamental principles, fundamental values of their country. But no, there are forces in the United States that only care about their own private interests. These are the kind of people who are pitiful, petty, despicable people, as they were described in Soviet books. But on the contrary, I think these people are
Jews, you mean?
smart sometimes. For example, when they want to feed their stories to people, they use this as a pretext. They do this not to
praise someone or to criticize someone. The reason I mention this is because I want us to take this into account in our practical work when we deal with Americans. These are just facts that we face today. Still, Russia is open to develop contacts with the United States as long as they're based on equality. This is not something that just our two countries need. The whole world needs this. Being two nuclear superpowers, we have special responsibility for global security and stability.
Uh-huh. So the nuclear superpowers can't afford to have Jews in their midst, basically. I mean, that's all that was. That was a snide, fucking, underhanded, dog whistling type.
During his news conference with President Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he wants to look into alleged tax evasion by associates of American-born financier Bill Browder. Putin claimed Browder's associates made $1.5 billion in Russia, never paid taxes on it, and then donated $400 million.
Yeah, like I said, Russian propaganda. Thanks to Newsy for being a very convenient source to get pretty objective little news clips for people who don't have time for, you know, hanging out with baby Jesus, for instance. What?
Ladies and gentlemen, the advisor to the president, Ivanka Trump.
The advisor to the president. Dude, it's the king's daughter, Princess Ivanka. For fuck's sake. Fucking shot of whiskey. Just after seeing that, oh my god. Putin meeting with Trump was successful. Oh yeah, well, I guess so. Former KGB spy describes Maria Butina as one hell of an amateur for, let's see how much we can get.
I believe that this case is a legitimate case of somebody trying to do a little bit of espionage. Based on this...
That guy. You know, You're the most, you're like the fucking Malcolm Nance of Euronews. Overplayed, limited experience. You wind up talking about a lot of shit that you don't really have direct knowledge of. But unlike Malcolm Nance, you seem to have a limited study ability that handicaps the degree of which you are capable of speculating accurately. This guy here. Whatever the fuck his name is. I don't care. Seen him before. Mostly on France 24. Now see, what may appear to a spy like him as being some amateur shit is part and parcel for a multi-patsy Confederate coup. You see, to undertake a coup in a nation of bureaucratically enforced laws, such as the United States, you need people just like Maria Butina to slow the process by intentionally widening the net beyond even the scope that it needs to be. And there's actually two benefits of this. One is that it increases the perceived legitimacy of the outcome by increasing the number of, participants in general in a risky manner, but in a necessarily risky manner. But the other is complicating the investigation that would follow. And both of those results have been achieved. So you can hardly call her ineffective. But she did get caught. Or she got arrested. Getting caught was part of the plan. Getting arrested, and probably not so much. Okay. Still fun times in Ukraine.
Терористи.
Ворожі снайпери, озброєні прицілами нічного бачення, ворожі стрільці починають свою справу із настанням сутінків.
Пулеметчик, тобто, виманює наших бійців, тобто, і вже снайпер починає працювати по нашій позиції.
Готуються провокації, впевнені вояки.
Я так себе понимаю, что они думают в дальнейшем какие-то действия. Я по ихним действиям я вижу, что они не собираются это все прекращать, им это все неинтересно. Они настроены на продолжение боевых действий. Настроены, значит, будем воевать.
Анастасія Стар.
So basically the occasional provoking raid, but mostly just snipers. Which I suppose would be on par with expectations.
My Republican colleagues in Congress to join Democrats in that request for an apology. President Trump obviously seemed frightened in the presence of Putin. What is he afraid of? What is Putin blackmailing President Trump with? Personally, politically, or financially? Whatever it is a level of blackmail that the American people cannot afford. Putin appears to be President Trump's puppeteer. And that day in Helsinki, he shone the light on the strings. The reports about the promises made in the private meeting are even more alarming. And then in addition to that, the outrageous suggestion of handing former Ambassador McCall over for Russian questioning. I thank our House Democrats on the Intelligence Committee who moved to subpoena the interpreter present in the Trump-Putin meeting. Of course, the Republicans rejected that. That the president would even entertain the idea of subjecting our diplomats to Putin's thuggery, that is an abuse of power. As Senator McCain said, the press conference with Putin in Helsinki was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. I come here with great sorrow and with the utmost respect for the people who voted for President Trump. But President Trump's actions have degraded the dignity of the office of the president, diminished the respect for our great nation throughout the world, and disregarded the obligation we have to our founders. What is at stake is the integrity of our elections. That is why we call upon House GOP to respect the Mueller investigation and to prevent President Trump from weakening sanctions on Russia for disrupting our elections. I come here again to talk about what we need to do. We need to stop the president from weakening sanctions on Russia. We need to have respect the Mueller investigation, as I mentioned. And we have an opportunity now, for us right now, a chance on the floor of the House to defend our democracy. This week, House Republicans brought to the floor an appropriations package that actually eliminates funding for the Election Assistance Commission. These are grants for states to enhance their election equipment to counter cyber attacks and defend against future intrusions. Democrats offered a motion in committee to force the vote to increase funding for the election security grants. It was dismissed by the Republicans as unworthy. Democrats will continue to push real action to protect our democracy from Russia's assault. As we speak, we are providing Republicans with another opportunity, another vote on the Quigley Amendment to restore vital election security grants. That is happening now, and because they changed the time, I may have to excuse myself after my statement. Democrats had hoped that instead of spending time on all of this, that there would be a stipulation of fact that, as the Intelligence Committee has said, that the Russians disrupted our election and they continue to try to do so. They also contend, some of them, that President Trump was aware that President Putin ordered those assaults. Instead of this, we had hoped that we could be working in a bipartisan way with President Trump. As a candidate, President Trump promised some things. For example, people are concerned about the high cost of prescription drugs. During the campaign, he said, we're going to negotiate like crazy. But apparently, like crazy means we're not going to negotiate at all. When it came to the drug companies, he kept refusing to enable the Secretary of HHS to negotiate down drug prices and sending pharmaceutical stocks soaring that very day. The night he won the election, President Trump promised, "We're going to rebuild our infrastructure, which will become, by the way, second to none." He had repeatedly talked about infrastructure, but that night, build our infrastructure second to none. We welcome that opportunity to work in a bipartisan way. Largely, infrastructure debate is largely bipartisan. But almost 2 years later, Congress still hasn't seen the big, bold infrastructure bill, which we could work in a bipartisan way to enact, creating millions of good-paying jobs. President Trump promised to drain the swamp, but he's turned it into a cesspool at the expense of the water our children drink, the air they breathe, the rights of America's consumers, the integrity of our American democracy, and the health and economic security of the American people. Democrats are here to offer a better deal for the people with better jobs, better wages, and a better future. Now I'm going to have to be excused because they haven't moved up the vote until now.
Can we ask you a question about this quickly? Or can you come back after the vote series to answer questions?
We do that. Just
Said walk off the floor.
It looks like she came back. Oh, no, can't play CBS. They fucking Nazis about their shit. What a coincidence that they should make so many attempts to marginalize the perception of truth. Oh, like they got Trump now blames Putin for Russia meddling in the election. They got the American flag right behind them. Oh, that's special. I tell you what, one thing we got to get straight on Fox News, and I'm going to start trying to make it clear to people who might wind up getting interviewed on there. Is reminding people of exactly how and why liberalism became perceived as an enemy by the Republican Party. Because they're literally falling for the same exact trap. And somehow pretending that liberals are the enemy just because they're liberals. Hyper-partisan nonsense, and it's really got to stop. Anyways, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chatting. Y'all take it easy. Don't take it all. Peace.
clear.